Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Heart Centered Therapist podcast. I'm Cindy Gozansky, your host. I'm so glad you're here. I know you have a lot of podcasts to listen to, and I really appreciate you being part of this community. Today, I am delighted to bring you a guest. Her name is Dr. Shawn Hondorp, and I can't wait for you to meet her. Shawn Hondorp, PhD, ABPP, is a board-certified clinical health psychologist and health behavior expert. She earned her doctorate from Drexel University in Philadelphia and completed her predoctoral internship and fellowship in health psychology at Rush University Medical Center in Chicago. She has a top-rated podcast called Motivation Made Easy, Body Respect, True Health, which is going to be renamed to The Innovative Therapist. And this is an amazing podcast with lots and lots of episodes. So I can't wait for you to check her podcast out. So in Motivation Made Easy, she interviews therapists and other people about the ways they've built lasting trust with their bodies and improved their health and well-being. Her passion is building authentic connection and talking about how research and real-world experience collide via honesty and personal stories. Shawn founded the Psychology of Wellness because she believes that the more people we teach to listen to and trust their bodies means more mental and emotional bandwidth available to create a more equitable and kind world. She creates supportive learning environments for therapists and hosts retreats, offering innovative approaches to healing. Shawn lives in Grand Rapids, Michigan, with her husband and two kids and a pug named Teddy. Welcome, Shawn, to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Yes, me too. And I love things about health psychology. I think so many of us in the therapy world do because we tend to have a holistic bent, and having like that whole person is more than just our minds and our emotions, but we're in these bodies. And sometimes we don't always like our bodies.
Yeah, I come from the research background, and I've always loved the mind-body connection. I think it's just amazingly fascinating, and I continue to be fascinated by it all the time.
Yeah, great. Well, we will definitely dive into this.
Mm-hmm.
So with the mind-body connection, we have the heart, and my podcast is called The Heart-Centered Therapist. So I always start with asking my guest, what does it mean to you? What does being a heart-centered therapist mean to you?
Yeah, this is a great question. I had to really think about it, but I think ultimately, a big value of mine is being authentic, being myself, and being able to bring myself into the therapy room, but also the other things, the non-therapy things that I'm doing, um, has been a little bit scary in some ways because it's kind of different than how we were trained, but
Mhm.
ultimately really freeing. And so I think bringing my authentic self to the work that I do, and really learning to trust my body in a way that, I know we'll get into this, but my story involves, disordered eating slash an eating disorder, kind of overcoming that a long time ago. And then my next level of like body trust has been various things, but definitely having a business has been a big
Hmm.
part of learning to trust my intuition and what I'm doing. I left a healthcare system job about over 3 years ago. So it's been, yeah, being a heart centered therapist has been a journey too, because when we're in these big systems, you
Right.
kind of have to do things a certain way, and even if it doesn't feel right to you. And I think there's been a lot of things about therapy and the previous work that I did, mostly in the weight management world, that didn't quite feel right to me. So it's been fun and a journey to explore and trust myself to kind of
Mhm.
move towards what feels right.
Yes. Wow. And so really that authentic part is super important to our work as heart-centered therapists, and I completely agree with that. And I'm very intrigued about when you talk about bringing in more of like your authentic self and personal life experiences into your work because that does go against a lot of what we're traditionally taught. And yet it can be so powerfully healing for our clients to know that they're not alone. Um, and
Mhm.
also, this concept of trusting yourself more as you become successful in business. Oh my goodness, I'm really interested in that too. So we've got a lot to cover.
We do.
Let
We do.
Yeah,
It's gonna be good.
good. It already is. Let's start with this building trust with your body, because that seems to be a tenet of what you share with your clients, with other therapists that you train, and that you came to yourself.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. As you likely know, there's a lot of barriers to us doing that. There's really a lot of, I would say, systems or ways, beliefs in our culture that don't necessarily, not like people don't want us to trust our body, but systems don't benefit from people really trusting their bodies. So, the main most, I would say, most obvious one would probably be diet culture and all the messages that we get, which is like, hey, the way to achieve health and success is, rooted in this is a smaller body is the best body, and a certain type of body is the best body, and that assumption. But then also the plan to get the success is outside of you, right? So here's your diet plan. And I was definitely on the, I would, I was sort of like a moderate, like I didn't think I was super restrictive with my
Mhm.
dieting, but I had many years of like 12 to 1500 calorie diets. But if I ran or exercised, I'd eat more. Like I was trying to follow the rules. I was trying to follow a lot of the things that I was trained to teach other people in terms of weight loss and like graduate school and research, weight loss trials, things like that. And yeah, it's been a journey to sort of move away from that and say, like, that doesn't actually foster long-term change for anyone. It can foster that short-term change of like where we have those fits and starts where we're eating in a certain way that feels good and moving our body. But typically, when it's driven by some external thing knows what I'm supposed to be doing, it just tends to
Mhm.
not be sustainable. And
Right.
yeah, it was quite the journey to get there. I studied all of these things very much looking back because
Mhm.
intuitively I knew I needed to figure them out myself.
You
And
needed it for yourself. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
And so I'm curious, if you're open to talking about this, Sean, like, were
yeah.
you already in like a healthier place with your eating when you started graduate school, or Mm,
No, I was in it kind of waxed and waned, I would say. I wasn't in a terrible place like in graduate school, but there was times in graduate school where it got worse. Not surprisingly, kind of related to
yeah.
more stressful years. And um, yeah, I mean, I came out of the program still. It was basically 2 years after I left graduate school, or maybe three, that I had made some progress with my relationship with food, but I finally found the book Intuitive Eating, although it had been around for years, and that kind of clicked for me. And it's not like, oh, I was healed and done, but in fact, doing my podcast, I'm like, oh, there's always more growth and healing the more you learn about these more weight inclusive approaches. But but yeah, I felt pretty healed up, and that was kind of when I'm like, okay, no more Weight Watchers, no more calorie
Mhm.
counting. Like I can trust myself to figure out, and I can trust my body to go to the weight that it is best for it, and kind of relinquishing control, which is really hard. And honestly, I think it's important to acknowledge like size privilege, and it's
Mm.
easier to lean in and trust our bodies when we have biologically a smaller body size, which most people would say that I do. So
Okay.
that's
Yeah.
a piece of it too.
Yeah. And I really just want to thank you for sharing that with us. Like, that's
Yeah.
such a vulnerable share, and I really acknowledge you because it's going to help so many of my listeners, right? So many people, if you just touch one life where, you know, somebody finds out like, oh, it's okay. You can get there, and um, knowing that somebody as successful as you are is willing to like take this brave step and share it, really, it means
Yeah.
so much. Just means so
Well,
much.
I really appreciate that because it's gotten a lot easier to share. It's not hard for me to at this point, but when I first started sharing on my podcast, I was quite nervous about it. But I love what you said, because one thing that really helped me in graduate school was this random podcast. It was back in 2009, and it
Uh-huh.
was a weight loss focused podcast, but she was sharing she struggled with binge eating, she struggled with all these things, and she was a pretty successful person. She was in like finance or something, but yeah, like one story, and I was like, I was very influenced. So that it was part of. So I appreciate you saying
Yeah.
that, because that it was part of why I did it. Is because I was like, well, if it helps like one person, it's worth it. Because
Absolutely.
it sucks
Absolutely.
being in it. It's
It sucks
awful.
being in it. And, most of us, unfortunately, because we've been a part of this culture, have struggled in some way, especially women, but also men. All people have struggled with this, right? Doesn't matter. We don't have to identify that way. And yet, we're talking about weight, but it could be something else that somebody is going through in grad school that they're like, yes, I know I'm not healthy yet, and I want to do this work and help others, but I'm still in it. Is it okay for me to be doing this work and identify this way? And you just are giving all of this permission because who better, right?
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
the people that really deeply care about it. And it's a
Yeah.
I think also hopefully people get the message that it's okay, that there is part of the reason I've went in this path is to work on healing myself. And I think I used to feel like, oh, that's selfish or that's bad, right? But it's like now, and I know we're going to talk a little bit about IFS, but I
Mm.
think of it as like that part of me that's like was just working so hard. It was like no one else is helping you, so I'm going to help you. And I'm going to like lead you to do all these things, like learn and grow and keep seeking resources until you figure it out. And so I have appreciation for that part of me now, and I don't judge it much
Oh,
anymore,
wow.
or maybe
Yeah.
at all. Yeah.
You're thinking that part. That's so
Yeah.
beautiful. Yeah.
Hmm. Totally.
Yeah. And that integration really helps, with this wholeness. And there's so many terms that are in this discipline around like weight and health at any size, health at every size, size privilege. Like I know about privilege, but I haven't actually heard those two together, which really makes sense. I'd probably be a person considered size privileged as well. That
Hmm.
doesn't mean I haven't had my own issues or haven't gone through like my own story, or had family members, right? And so this is just,
Hmm.
it really does hit home. Um, as you were talking about the external factors, like forget Weight Watchers, the counting calories, this external diet, somebody says, it seems like this externality doesn't influence our own motivation. So talk to me about that.
Yeah, yeah. It's well, and the reality about motivation is it's not like we either have it or we don't. We have different types of motivation. And when we have a lot of that external motivation, it's not that it's bad motivation per se. More benign example would be like, let's say someone really wants to run a 5K, and they're like, well, I signed up for the race and I have a date, and I really, this is important to me, but it is external. And maybe after they run it, they might be like, I'm not as motivated to run anymore because I was doing it for that external like achievement. It's
Right.
not bad motivation. It's just not as likely to be associated with that long-term sustainable change. So if you really want to foster a love of running or of nourishing your body, we have to look at the external. We have to look at where it comes from. We have to unpack where those messages came from and help to kind of unlearn a lot of that so that you can lean into some more freedom to then figure out what actually works for you. And it's a journey, it's a process, because these messages are really ingrained, not just diet culture, but also what I would say like hustle culture, overworking culture, right? Like, and also really real systems that make like inflation and things, like the need to make
Right.
money. There's just a lot of things that get in the way of our ability to really deeply take care of our bodies. So I think it is important to acknowledge that it's a hard time to take care of your body. It's worth continuing to move towards it.
Yeah.
But if you're struggling with that, that's very understandable. But what we really want to help people do is kind of unpack where those messages came from, and you know learning to turn towards and understand, and maybe, yes, reduce some of the self-criticism around some of those things. But first, before we can reduce it, we usually have to understand that it
Mhm.
actually has like a really positive intention and is there for a good reason, which I know we're going to kind of get into. But to really foster that internal motivation or autonomous motivation, really there's two types. And so it is important to kind of notice, like, intrinsic motivation is like we just love the thing, we would do it no matter if we ever got any external reward from it, right?
Right.
And that could be anything, and it's going to be different for all of us. But and then the other internal type of motivation, maybe we don't always love the activity, but we're actively choosing it, so no one's forcing
Mhm.
us. The example I was used for myself for this is cooking. Like, I really value trying to cook at home, saves money, you know,
Mhm.
more nutritious, can have more control over what we're eating. I don't love it. Maybe one day I will. And these things can shift and change
Right.
over time. There's a chance I could learn to intrinsically love cooking. I would love that because it would help me do it more. But
But you love the
if
value of it. You just don't necessarily love the activity.
yes, exactly. It's
Yeah.
consistent with my values. I feel proud of myself when I do it. Honestly,
Mhm.
I'm a lot better at being like, "Good job, you are doing great." But when that's kind of covered up by diet mentality, as it is for so many people, like, "Oh, you really should," because so often that's rooted in like body shame and like your body's bad and wrong and you need to fix it. That's gonna it might lead to fits and starts of doing it, but it's gonna make it so much harder to figure out an eating and movement routine that actually works.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. So it is important to be able to choose something, to recognize that you're choosing it as
Hmm.
part of the motivation.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I really love how validating you are that this is an incremental process. It can be hard, and it's okay to say, this is really hard work, or it's really hard to like try to be healthy right now with all of these other factors and
Oh yeah.
situations. Yeah.
Yeah. Totally. And yeah, the healthiest choice can often be, that's why you'll hear sometimes people don't like the term healthy or unhealthy, because and it's taught everywhere. My daughter comes home and says it, and I'm always like, why do you think that's like chocolate's not healthy? I'm like, tell me more. I think it can
Mhm.
be healthy sometimes, right? Like,
Right.
it's delicious. And um because yeah, sometimes the healthiest choice can be like, it's been a really long day, we're ordering pizza, it's no big deal, and
Yeah.
it's fine. and
Yeah.
and of course I do that often, right? Not like, there's all these rules like, well, okay, but only once in a while. It's like there's a lot of different ways to take care of ourselves, and it can look a lot of different ways. So that
Yeah.
freedom, right?
Yeah. That's so great. Freedom. We keep talking about freedom, and I know this is something we want. We want this in our lives and in our personal and professional lives, work and how we feel about ourselves. And so I think it's all going to
Mhm.
kind of get entwined as we continue our conversation today.
Yes.
Um, share a little about the notion of competence and relatedness because you told me those are part of the psychology of motivation.
Yes. Yep. So this is all based on, for any people that love research like me, it's based on a theory of motivation called self-determination theory. It's really well studied across not just health behaviors. So self-determination theory.org. It's pretty fascinating, and it's a little bit jargony, but essentially, when we think about trying to shift away from external motivation to that internal motivation, we want to meet three key psychological needs for any behavior we want to foster kind of long-term consistent change with. And so that is autonomy, that freedom of choice without excessive pressure, which we've been touching on. The second one is competence, feeling effective, feeling like, yeah, I got this. And just to point out that like the statistics about weight loss dieting are not wrong and that they really rarely lead to that long-term change. So if we think about like that really reduces that sense of competence, like that's definitely was the case for me, right? I'm like, I clearly am failing at this, but it's like, I think the system is failing us, right? And I think it's important to look at that. How can we foster a sense of competence when it comes to making changes? Well, one good way is to reduce the focus on weight, which is really
Mhm.
hard to do, um, and
Right.
for good reason. But just wanted to kind of throw that out there. But yeah, and the third one, which is really important, which is directly related to your community and what you're trying to build, is a sense of relatedness, a sense that one belongs and that they're welcomed, regardless of
Mm.
any different factor about them, size, race, ethnicity, any of the other things that make us unique and diverse. And so when we're in communities where we feel like we belong, we really understandably thrive and we tend to figure out how to move towards autonomous motivation for, health behaviors, but other behaviors too.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful message that we can heal and grow and thrive in communities like that, right? And
Yeah.
then that fosters even more that sense of competence. I like how you say, like, I've got this, right? And
Hmm.
having
Hmm.
others who cheerlead you with that. And even as you're
Yeah.
saying this, Sean, I'm kind of like, okay, and here's the message where the message sometimes probably gets like miswired. We come up in families and we think we belong or we're supposed to belong in these families. And yet we get all of these conflicting messages about, healthy, not healthy, size,
Mhm.
everything else, right?
Yep.
And it's confusing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It is. And yeah, we have like our little family of origin community. We have various larger communities we're part of, and just our
Cultural.
larger cultural context. And yeah, there's a lot of harmful messages. Like
Mm.
there's a lot of like even like, yeah, this is how we do things and this is the way we are. And so if you're trying to shift in some way, you can get shamed for that, right? And that could, I
Yeah.
don't know, it could be a lot of different
Yeah.
things. How that,
Right.
but yeah, it can be a lot to unpack.
It
Not gonna
really is.
lie.
I mean, and you
Mhm.
have your PhD in this. So like you're an expert here and you're still learning and sharing and bringing guests onto your podcast. I mean,
Oh yeah.
guys, Sean has like over 100 episodes already, like she's really gotten some esteemed guests and shared her own wisdom and experience. And so that's what I'm just so grateful that you're here with us today. Um, in terms of you being able to like make that shift and let go of like the diets and Weight Watchers and then an IFS, were they connected for you? Was like working with IFS what helped you
Mhm.
shift everything or
No, IFS came into my awareness only about not quite 2 years ago. So
Hmm.
that was a lot newer. And how I'm incorporating that increasingly as I've been learning is a relatively new development. So my relationship with food, I find IFS is really wonderful and just allows me to go even deeper with my clients and with
Hmm.
healing and it's been hugely helpful to me personally, more so with my overworking parts and some other parts of me that I didn't even realize were maybe sort of taking the place. Like I don't restrict. I don't do any binge eating. I eat to cope with emotions because that's a normal thing to do. But
Oh wait,
like I
is that
don't have
normal?
those parts. Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. It's super common, and we want to we want to destigmatize binge eating too. But binge eating is different in some ways, or it can
Hmm.
be different than emotional eating. But yeah, like to just intentionally be like, it's a stressful day and I'm tired, and okay,
Hmm.
I'm eating some Christmas candy, it's fine. you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
to just not stress about that's always bad is freeing and it really can usually be necessary. If someone never wants to do that, that's your choice and that's fine too.
Right.
But I personally find that it's freeing to be able to be like, yeah, I don't binge, I don't eat till I'm sick anymore. So that's
Mhm.
good. But
Yeah,
yeah.
that's great. And again, thank you for telling us this, right? And giving us the
Yeah.
permission to know, like, you know what? Emotional eating is actually pretty normal. And so let's
Mhm.
not beat ourselves up. Let's have some self-compassion around
Yep.
that. And,
Yes.
especially for therapists, we're going to talk a little bit more, particularly about therapists or people who have like these sedentary, long hour jobs, and what we can do to
Mhm.
try to like improve our connection with our bodies. But
Yeah.
yeah, so like every time we normalize something, I just know it makes such a difference. And
Mhm.
thank you for that.
Yeah,
Hmm.
you got
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. So how
Happy
did
to
you
do it.
change with like the diet culture? Um,
Mhm.
yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I would say my journey with that was, kind of gradual. It tends to be how I change in most areas. I have
Mhm.
less like I guess sometimes I'll have like aha moments, but it's more I'm a research person, right? So if I had a graph, I'd be like gradual ups and downs, but like a gradual upslope. And for me though, intuitive eating, it was kind of reading that book was kind of the final thing that helped things click. At that time, I was living in Chicago, training for my first and only marathon. I always had a pretty healthy relationship with exercise and running. I tend to actually really enjoy that
Oh, I'm a runner
intrinsically.
too. I love
Oh, you
running.
are? Nice.
Yeah. This is great.
I love it. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was like I was training for that first marathon. And then I, for some reason, like had joined Weight Watchers, and it was like the final thing that I was like, what on earth am I doing? I think I had read the book recently and it planted some seeds. And I don't know, it was just that final like letting go. And, I trained for the marathon. I think I gained a little bit of weight because that can be normal when with all that running. And I was just like, it's okay. But again, this easier said than done. I don't want to make it seem like it just changed. But I was also starting to dig into some other stuff in therapy. But I would say a lot of it was sort of me trying to do it on my own, which
Mhm.
pros and cons, I suppose.
Right.
And now I'm not trying to do things on my own, and I've found some therapy modalities and therapists that have really allowed me to go to a deeper level. But I was able to kind of heal up a lot of my food stuff.
Mhm.
I don't know. I think that was like close to 15 years ago now, maybe.
Wow.
I'm not sure
Wonderful.
exactly.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So really in combination with some changes in your life, your lifestyle, um, gaining a little bit of healthy weight through running
Hmm.
and then
Yeah. Yep.
reaching out and getting some help because I think we tend to be pretty like I'm going to do it myself, independent therapists. I mean, kind of work on our own.
Hmm.
It's
Oh
hard
yeah,
to
I have it
get
all.
help.
I have it all. I know everything. Like
Yeah.
it's like, well,
Hmm.
yeah. I actually my story is that about a little over a year and a half ago I joined a parent coaching program. So I have two kids and my second kid is pretty strong-willed and I didn't know parenting threw me for a whole nother loop that really has definitely fostered this continued growth and as also being a business owner, but I would say parenting,
Yeah.
particularly my youngest, was it put me into a parent coaching program, and that parent coach really was so helpful to me. And I was like, oh, maybe I actually can gain some outside benefit. Like maybe I don't know everything, and maybe someone can challenge me in a loving way. And that also prompted me to get back into some kind of trauma informed therapy. And ultimately, I started my own IFS therapy recently, which has been pretty cool. So
Amazing. Amazing. Right. And
yeah.
and it just shows, right? Like challenge ourselves in a loving way. And we can do that with a therapist, we can do that with a coach, with a group, with,
Hmm.
some trusted person. It's really important. Um, and just the sense of like this takes time, right? We're
Hmm.
talking about like over some time. And so whatever you do, don't give up, right? Like Sean, your story is so inspiring. Yeah,
Yeah.
it really is. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, and yeah, like your question is so good, and I never want to come off as dismissive. If, like I just read this book and it was over, right? But
Mhm.
it was finally like me just having enough of like this dieting thing is just not getting me anywhere close to any of the results. I was never actually low weight at all. My weight never fluctuated a ton in terms of
Mhm.
like big
Yeah.
fluctuations, but yeah, I was just like, this is
Right.
not I'm not getting any of the results. So just okay, I'm going to trust that my body knows what it's doing.
Mhm.
And that was the process too. But yeah.
Yeah, and even that is important because sometimes, you might think like if somebody else is in your shoes and they're like, "Yeah, well, I don't have these big weight fluctuations," or I'm pretty okay, but I know inside this isn't working for me, or I'm getting really anxious around like my meal planning or eating with people or whatever it is, or my exercise a
Hmm.
little weird. Like
Hmm.
that's what I love about these really honest conversations is because we normalize it and we say, "Okay, look, what can you do for yourself? If you really want to change something, let's look at it." And there's so much that so many more like gentle, affirming ways to do it. And that's what you're talking about today.
Yeah, totally. And hopefully,
Yeah.
like, yeah, really planting that seed of hope. Like, if you're like,
Mhm.
I think I could feel better,
Mhm.
you could, and it may take some effort, but it's worth it if you want it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, how do you use the IFS with your clients? I mean,
Hmm.
you've given us like a little bit of parts language and the overworking part of you, and oh my goodness, I have
Hmm.
her too. Um, so yeah,
Yep.
let's talk about like the IFS in terms of applying it in therapy sessions with your clients who have body concerns.
Yeah, yes, it's been so nice, so helpful. So I would say, there's different common parts that might show up in my clients, and let's maybe start with the part that restricts or wants to diet or wants to yeah, just like restrict eating or minimize eating, or wants to like optimize or be super healthy. It can take different forms, right? But sometimes as therapists, we want to like convince that part to change or to like
Mm.
be like, okay, but remember, like restriction's bad and it'll prompt binge eating and education, which can be helpful. But for some of these parts, they can be really like, yeah, you don't get it. You don't understand my role. And so we have to really understand. So it might look like really focusing on somatically how they experience that part when they notice thoughts like, I gotta eat less, or I
Mm.
can't eat that specific food, that's bad. And turning towards and really understanding, getting the other parts that dislike that part or that are polarized with it to step aside and really developing that compassionate relationship with that part, because
Mm.
it is trying to do something good, even if it ultimately ends up not leading to a good outcome. So that is one example. I would say, another example that's hard but really powerful for people is to look at that internalized self critic that can often look like internalized body shame. So, they see themselves in a picture or they pass a mirror and they immediately start berating themselves. We look at, again, the intention behind that part. And again, that one can be harder to approach for most people because it can really activate that, what IFS would call exiled part that carries a lot of shame. Um,
Mhm.
but being able to see that the intention most of the time, those inner critics, which most of us have one, I certainly do, although I work with it much better than I used to. That's another really big benefit of IFS for me. They have a protective function. They're trying to often sort of steal us or get us to change. Often that critic leads to like a change part. And so it's related to like self improvement. And when we can really see the system compassionately, it can really be a game changer for how we approach those parts when they show up.
Yeah, right. So there's this sense of being curious about these parts. What is their role? What are they trying to do?
Yep.
How could they let these other parts in the system know and kind of inviting
Yeah.
that? Hmm.
Yep. Yeah. And in the IFS model, it's all about creating a self to part relationship. So getting the other parts in the system that don't like that part to just give a little space, which for me and for many clients, it's sometimes can feel like, or actually be the first time of truly experiencing self compassion, not just cognitive self compassion. Many of us are like, I don't know if you're anything like me, you're like, yeah, I want to do self compassion. That sounds awesome. But like,
Right.
my critic was like, yo, I don't know about that. Like,
Yeah, exactly. We can
yeah,
go
good
there in our
plan.
heads, like
Yeah,
intellectualize it.
right, exactly. Like, you are allowed to cry, but you have another part that's like, that's not safe. you're being whatever you're. And so it's, yeah, for me, I feel like it's a really nice way to move towards embodiment, but also
Mhm.
just like appreciating those parts of yourself, like, oh, okay, you're here for a reason too.
Yeah, yeah. I can see how this would just lend so much to things around weight and body image and self-esteem.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And honestly, many of my clients were also working with unrelated to weight and eating too, right? Like,
Right.
but yeah, all of it. It's very good too. I would say that a common polarization that people have that I work with is a desire to lose weight or make your body smaller or maintain your weight gets polarized with a desire for a peaceful relationship with food, desire for not getting too rigid, not getting too disordered. Most of my clients have some degree of both of those parts and they fight, and it's exhausting. And so
Mhm.
we learn to listen to both. And that's where we can kind of approach even like really nuanced decisions about. There's tons of everyone's hearing about the new weight loss meds and the
Right.
GLP-1 agonist meds. And I used to, some of my background's in bariatric surgery. So,
Mhm.
you know, learning to trust our clients or teaching our clients to trust themselves that they can listen to these parts and make a choice from a place of what IFS would call self energy, from a place of self trust and intuition. And that it's kind of freeing as a therapist because you don't have to have all the answers for weight loss meds or like any decision.
Right.
Um, so that's kind of a nice thing about the approach too.
Mhm. Yeah, and that intuitive piece is really helpful. For any decision, especially around, sure, we would like a medication that makes a lot of things work better, but there's still that inner working that has to happen.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Um, yes. So right, you are up against a lot. And now that you talk about those weight loss drugs too. Oh my goodness. Hmm.
They are everywhere this time of year as we record in January. That's
Yeah,
definitely
right.
a lot of
Yeah.
exposure to that, a lot of opportunity to work with
Hmm.
parts of clients that and parts of me that are like have different I don't know. I have different opinions. Or different parts of me have different opinions about those drugs, and
Yeah.
holding
Yeah.
space for all of that, right?
Right. Right. Exactly. Yeah. And we're recording this in January, and it makes me think about people who are like starting on exercise workout routine or different, healthy regimens. And sometimes we set ourselves up for disappointment, sometimes for success. What do you recommend in terms of like a new year, new you?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think if someone, like, let's just say someone has started and maybe they're, um, it depends, but maybe they have been able to maintain some of those changes. It's okay. First of all, it's okay if you start something at a new year. Like, it's
Yeah.
fine. I personally have been starting to like get up a little earlier without snooze, and I've done it consistently since a year, and I'm incredibly proud of myself.
That's
So,
awesome. You should
yeah.
be.
Yes,
That's
it's been
great.
like a thing I've been trying to do for like a long time.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I think
so
accountability
yeah.
is important. You just like said
Mhm.
it in front of a witness, so that's cool. Accountability can be really helpful with our goals.
Yes. Yeah, especially for certain personality types. And I'm one
Mhm.
that benefits from that for sure. Like
Yeah.
I know there's some personality types that are like, I'll just do it regardless, but many of us benefit from that accountability. Yeah, and I think really looking at why you want it, right? Like that values piece. The other thing that I think is really helpful is so you can have an external goal, but really looking at why you want it, but also how you want to feel emotionally, how you want to feel in your body, and really focusing on those words. Or even, I used to be very against like anything related to like manifesting or vision boards. Like I used to be, I'm a scientist. I'm like, that's, but there is a lot of science to support it. And honestly, my personal experiences, when you focus more on like I'm in my parenting program, we do some of that, like together, right? In community, what do you want this year, related to your family or not? And Like mine last year was like, I want a more calm and spacious life, or, reflecting more regularly on, I have a little journal now it's like, what are sort of, like she calls it vibes and values, but it's like, what are some of the vibes or things you want to feel? And I forget what mine was today, but just kind of like, I want to feel grounded. I want to feel aligned. I want to feel nourished. Like those can be really helpful to focus on, in addition to, because that taps into more of that intrinsic, how do I want to feel? And then you can kind of, it can help guide you to like what you want to do. Because so many of us were just so conditioned to like doing a lot of doing, a lot of
Absolutely.
tasking. Yeah.
Right. So much doing. And that intrinsic motivation is really helpful because I could even see like somebody who wants to go to the gym, right? But it seems like a chore, but how do you want to feel when you're done with your workout? Or how do you want to feel when you're done with a walk, solo or with a friend or whatever? That changes the whole concept of like doing the activity.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, I think like continuing to just get curious, right? Of like, is the gym your scene? Do you love it? Like when you get there and do it and you come back, do you love it? Like, great. Like that's kind of
Mhm.
for me, and like I do 10 minutes of stretching when I get up. That's it. I only make myself do 10 minutes, but I do love how I feel actually during and after.
Mhm.
But also that permission of like, not everyone's a gym person. And can
Right.
we get curious of where you got that message that this is how we exercise. This is how we're supposed to move, or just listening to your body and saying like, yeah, this is how I want to feel. And what do I see myself doing? What have I always yearned to do? And listening to those desires, is really vulnerable, because again, usually we're not trained to do that or taught to do
Right.
that.
Right. It requires us to get a little quiet and to really turn inside, and we don't always know what we're going to find, so it can be
Hmm.
scary. But it's
Totally.
it's worth it. It's worth it.
It is.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So, for therapists and our well-being, I'm a big proponent of therapist and self-care, having
Hmm.
community connection, that ineffable balance that we're always trying to find, because otherwise we are going to burn out if we don't have some systems in place that really support us and nurture us. Um, I know my legs, my back, my butt hurts from sitting in a chair. Tried the stand-up desk. Sometimes it works, sometimes not. But we as a group
Yeah.
tend to have a lot of stress. We have sedentary jobs. We do the emotional, uh, probably emotional eating, or
Hmm.
starving ourselves because we're going back to back to back. And
Yeah. Never
so
peeing. Right.
never peeing, right. So, like,
Hmm.
what you work with therapists, you take them on retreats, you do workshops. What do you advise for us as a group in terms of bodies, health, weight?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a great question. And I mean, I think really looking at, first of all, giving yourself permission to try to, well, if you work for yourself, obviously you have more freedom, but trying to really say, how can I design my day in a way that actually supports my body?
Mhm.
So, or this is something I'm not personally good at, but I've been thinking about doing, like really communicating more clearly to clients. Like I have to stop at least at 5 to the hour. So you have like this little break and you can get up and stretch. I need to be better about that. But I know my clients, if I say that, like they'll be fine with it. I just
Right.
haven't yet, because I just haven't. But trying
Well,
to
we both have
I
those strong overworking parts. That's why I'm very similar
mhm.
to you.
Yes. Yeah, yes. And my overworking part has made some progress, which has been very fascinating lately. Like I've really like listened to it. I'm like, and
Mhm.
it's really stepping back. But yes, like trying to just listen and trying to not scheduling breaks, right? Making
Mhm.
your schedule work for you. The other thing I'm really interested in, I took a course a while ago on walking therapy. I've not yet done it. But I think it's so interesting, and we can at least like explore it, right? So,
Right. Walk
insurance
and talk
coverage,
therapy.
walk and talk therapy. Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Um, and the other thing that I'm trying to do with my offerings for therapists, is I I use a lot of the Voxer app, which is like a free audio app,
Mhm.
where you can send messages, listen to messages. I use that to communicate with friends. I use that to communicate with my parent group. So I will go and walk on my breaks and like respond to messages from, like, we just had a little book club that went through the IFS No Bad Parts book with actually
Mhm.
some therapists, some not, but it's more of my education coaching business, which I do have separate. Obviously with therapy, sometimes we have some confines, but I think, that's why I'm renaming my podcast Innovative, because that's the thing that gets me so
Yes.
jazzed. Like, how can we think innovatively to make our work for us too?
Yeah. Oh, I
Because
love that. Really outside of the box. And
mhm,
and again, bringing in that intrinsic feeling. How do you want to feel, right? So designing your day, or how do you want to feel like if I think, oh, now I have to take a 10-minute walk, but if I knew I could maybe Voxer with a friend or a colleague, that
mhm,
would be way more fun.
mhm.
So anyone who wants to Voxer me, like reach out. I
Yeah.
don't know if Sean has room on her Voxer, but
Maybe.
yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, it
those are
is really
great
fun.
ideas of, like, expanding our range of things we could do.
Mhm, mhm. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and really giving yourself permission, like, so yeah, one of the other things last year that I focused on was like, really leaning into my zone of genius, which
Mhm.
I really enjoy therapy. I think it's my zone of excellence. Sometimes it can feel like my zone of genius where I'm just like
Mhm.
in it, so energized, but really making, like, looking at ways I can do work that I absolutely love and really provide a great service, but it doesn't feel like work, and actually trying to get paid for that work feels so different than what we're conditioned to do, because we're like, well, I would do it for free. So I did a mini retreat like last October that was like collaborated with a running coach, and we like did a
Wow.
little run in the woods, and it was a real small, it wasn't actually for therapists, it was some therapists, some non-therapists,
Yeah.
but we did some IFS meditations. We collaborated. It was on a Sunday, I think, and I I don't work on the weekends usually. My overworking part is very much in check, but it didn't feel like work, and I did it. I'm like, I just made money doing something I would have done for free. So I
Oh,
think also like opening ourselves up to our conditioning, which is like, you make money doing stuff that's like hard, or like at least effortful. I'm like, it felt a little effortful to like be present for the meditations and things. It wasn't no effort, right? But I was like, oh, I just got so much out of that myself.
yeah, that's great. And you recognize that that's dropping into your zone of genius and something that
Hmm.
you really enjoy doing. Yeah.
Hmm.
How does that
Yeah.
connect for you, Sean, with the notion that being a business owner and entrepreneur has also led to greater health for you, which you said at the beginning?
Yeah. I think, when you're outside of the structures, you really have to look at like, how am I doing things, and what do I believe, which is scary, but also very freeing, going back to that concept of like freedom and autonomy, right? Um, and so it's allowed me to continue to pursue the work that feels incredible, energizing, like that actually is fueling versus draining. Because sometimes therapy can be draining, right?
Yeah.
Like, let's not sugarcoat it. And so
Right.
to try to look at how we can actually do the work I believe that when we have people doing the work that makes them come alive, like, everyone benefits. And so many of us were taught like, well, no, you just have to like work hard and serve the people and do the things that they need. And we're just also factoring in our needs into it. And so, I wasn't able to really do that when I'm just like required to do X amount of bariatric evals every day, and I did not like doing bariatric evals, not because I didn't like the clients, but because that was not my zone of genius.
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. So now you're really having more fulfillment and satisfaction.
yeah,
Um,
yep. And I will say, of course, that has been a journey, right? So
Mhm.
this January was the start of year 4. Year 3 was a lot better. Year 1 and 2 were a lot of overworking, a lot of trial and error, a lot of things that, looking back, were not aligned. Just like creating an online program that I was very proud of the program itself, but the way I was encouraged to market it, I'm like, oh no, I'm not a marketing expert. I'll just do what they say. But looking back, I'm like, it didn't
Mm.
really feel right. And just doing a lot of stuff that was like a waste of my time, honestly.
Yeah.
So, but yes, it is feeling a lot better lately, and I'm very excited for this year and what's to come. It's feeling a lot more, honestly, like easy to kind of trust what feels right. And I mean, talk to me in a few months. Hopefully I'll feel the same. Hopefully I'll feel more so, but
Yeah,
yeah, who knows what the
exactly.
future holds. Yeah,
Right, right. But you're excited going into it. That's so
definitely.
great. Share with us a little bit about what you offer for therapists.
Yeah. Well, just recently, so the mini retreats I've done before, but the big retreat, which is going to be 3 nights, is I went on a retreat to see how someone does them in
Hmm.
November, and I booked a retreat in Michigan, on Lake Michigan in October. So it's a ways away, but I booked that like just a week ago. So it's super fresh, super
Oh,
new.
congratulations.
Yeah, it's gonna be great. It's small, like
Hmm.
8 therapists, me, someone who's helping me run the event, and a private chef. So it's gonna be real good food.
Yeah,
And yeah, it'll be yoga and business photography and all the things. So, I'm
nice.
really excited about that, like just kind of creating the space for therapists to kind of connect with their body, do some of this reflective work. The teaching is all about IFS, honestly, so much about the concepts we touched on today.
Hmm.
And then, yeah, and then the other offering that is, I just finished up sort of an IFS book club, and as we speak, sort of in the process. I'm sort of like letting the creation process happen. So I don't know exactly when. I'm hoping within the next month I'll have an offering for therapists wanting to learn some of these concepts, learn some about IFS, possibly going through that No Bad Parts book together, doing the exercises together, and kind of processing,
Mm,
probably on Voxer, a little bit on Zoom. That's what we did last time, and it went really well, but specific to therapists. And yeah, and also having some Zoom calls for like confidential client consultation.
yeah,
So
yeah.
that's the tentative plan. And I have some other possible ideas just because I think I'm so excited about like the yoga component. There's a body worker that I have an email out to her right now of she essentially does IFS and somatic. Well, she knows she
Mm.
does somatic work, but she does IFS and doesn't know she does IFS. I'm like, you're doing IFS, right? So I don't know, maybe some yoga integration embodiment piece. So it's like not just learning and staying in our heads, right?
Mhm.
So anyway,
Yeah,
those are some
that's
some of the things. It's kind of always changing and evolving, but that's I think the two main things I see for this coming year. And if people are local to Michigan, maybe a little bit of local connection group, just because I think that's I think I'm craving in-person
mhm.
connection for sure. So
Yes, yes. That sounds so awesome. And, I'm really glad the listeners got to hear a little about you and get to know you and kind of your style. And if somebody feels aligned with you, Shawn, then they can reach out to you. We're going to have everything listed in the show notes, right? Because that's how you
yeah.
know when you really want to work with somebody, you get a flavor for them. And
Mhm.
so, it's like that's really the best way to do it. So I think that's
Yeah.
great.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so share with us your website and
Yeah.
also the podcast.
Yes. Yeah, so website is my name, drshawnhondorp.com. And there, yeah, you can jump on my email list. My email's on there. You can directly email me. I have like a bunch of, we were talking about lead magnets before we hit record, but like I have a
Mm.
bunch of those. I've one, if people go to drhondorp.com, it's like a shorter one, /parts. There's like a kind of that polarization between the weight loss and the wanting peace with food free resource.
So good.
Yep. And I've done a few workshops about that, like in more depth too. So if you're on my email list, you'll know about all of that. And yeah, the podcast is currently called Motivation Made Easy, Body Respect, True Health. And it's official. In the last few months, I've been mulling over kind of a rebrand. I've been the same name for the whole time. I started it in, I think, February 2021. So it's been a while. I've taken some
Mm.
breaks, went from weekly to by every other week, to reduce the overworking. But
Mm.
I'll probably take a short break in a bit here and then rebrand it. So if you're searching this like after like April, it'll probably be called The Innovative Therapist. And I think if you search my name in the podcast players, either
Yeah.
one, it should come up. But yeah, I appreciate you saying that, because we do have I have a lot of guest interviews. I use it as my own learning, continuing education, and I just love my guests. And
Mhm.
so we do have a nice backlog of episodes. And yeah, definitely, I definitely respond to all my emails, unless they're
Oh.
random podcast pitches that don't have clearly know nothing about me. But everything else, if it's a personal email, I will definitely respond.
Yeah.
So people can always reach out.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Sean, for sharing so much of your personal and professional world with us and
Yeah.
really normalizing and validating this journey that so many of us are on with trying to come to peace with our bodies and have more trust in our bodies. And it's so important. This work you're doing, I just really want to acknowledge you for bringing this work to your clients and to therapists for themselves and also to help them with their clients. It's really powerful and it's making a difference. So thank you
Thank you
so
so much.
much.
Yeah, it was
Yeah,
really fun. Really enjoyed it and loved your
great.
questions. So thank you.
Great. Me too. Thank you.